Yesterday, we talked about Nico Hoerner, but what about some of the other Cubs? We'll see which ones could fit for the Mariners and more coming up here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Tuesday, July 2nd, 2024. This is Titan Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's show, we're going to talk more about the Cubs, who look like they might be gearing up to sell later this month. We talked about Nico Hoerner yesterday, but we're going to dive into more of that roster here in just a moment. We'll also talk about the Mariners' upcoming series with the Baltimore Orioles. But before we do that, shout out to our title sponsor today, FanDuel. Make every moment more. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on, that's LOCKDON, to get yourself started. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. The link is in the description, and you can sign up for a free 7-day trial. So yesterday we talked quite a bit about the Cubs because Jon Morosi went on MLB Network yesterday morning and mentioned Nico Hoerner, and that if Hoerner was available, the Mariners could be interested. That was just speculation. He wasn't reporting anything as we went over. But he did go on local radio in Chicago yesterday and actually reported something. This comes from our friends at Locked On Cubs, saying Jon Morosi just reported on 670 The Score that the Cubs are signaling to teams that they are open to selling later this month. No trade talks are imminent, but Cody Bellinger, Ian Happ, and Jameson Taillon are all mentioned as candidates to clear money while refreshing the roster. So first and foremost, let's consider the source here. I think we all at this point are aware of the shakiness of Jon Morosi's credibility, especially over the last year or so. But looking at the responses to that tweet and just kind of gauging the feel of Cubs fans over the last 24 hours or so, I kind of did some digging on that after the Hoerner thing yesterday. Seems like Cubs fans feel like this is where things are heading as well, that the team is going to sell to at least a certain degree at the deadline this month. So with that in mind, let's talk about Cody Bellinger and Ian Happ first. I don't think Jameson Taillon is going to generate much interest from the Mariners, even though they might be in the market for a back-end starter. But Bellinger and Happ are very interesting, especially in a vacuum if you just eliminate their contract situations, which obviously you can't. But those players would be really solid fits for the Mariners. I think Bellinger is fascinating. I'm really intrigued by how he's kind of reinvented himself as a hitter. He's cut down the strikeouts. I think that swing plays well at T-Mobile Park. He's had some bad luck this year. If you look at the BABIP, it's only a 299 BABIP this year. So he might be better than the numbers would ultimately indicate. He's only a 109 WRC plus this year. Ian Happ is a 120 WRC plus this year. Really solid player who can, play decent defense in a corner. 229, 345, 419 slash line this year. Solid player. But again, the contracts are what makes this a complicated fit, to say the least. Cody Bellinger making $27.5 million this year. That's obviously going to be cut a little bit more in half by the deadline, of course. But next year, he has a player option after this year, $27.5 million in 2025. He's going to take that player option, especially with the year that he's having right now. And then he has another player option after that year for $25 million in 2026. And then for Happ, he's making $21 million this year. Again, that'll be cut a little bit more in half by the time you would theoretically acquire him. But you would be on the hook for $21 million in 2025, $19 million in 2026. That is all guaranteed, by the way. So again, Colby, the players are interesting. They certainly make a lot of sense just in a vacuum for the Mariners, but do you think, considering the contract situation here, that this is something the Mariners would realistically look into?
It's tough to say. I think both of those guys, even with the proration of their contracts, I think they're making enough that the Mariners would need some kind of help, or like that's all that they could do is just acquire one of those guys. They need to do more than that. I think by help, I mean they need money coming from the Cubs, or they need the Cubs to take on one of their bad contracts. Either way you slice it, that's going to be more expensive and therefore more difficult for Jerry and Justin to find a deal that works, whether they can get them to take Haniger or Garver or Polanco, or if the Cubs just send cash to them, it's going to cost some prospects to do that. So, and probably some pretty good ones. So yeah, the contracts are very difficult. And, you know, if you're trying to acquire Cody Bellinger, it's like, are we getting him for 2 months? Are we getting him for a year and 2 months? Are we getting him for 2 years and two?
Yeah.
Like, what how do we approach his trade value? Because if we get him for 2 months, that's significantly different than if we get him for a year and 2 months, and we pay for a year and 2 months and we only get 2 months. We're in a bad spot. That really hurts. So you know, and obviously the Cubs are probably going to negotiate under the assumption that, well, he's got 2 years of club control left, and it's like he doesn't.
Right.
His club control is 2 months.
Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
it could end up being another year, but it also could not. And obviously, Bellinger, we can sit here and say he's going to opt in, but we don't know that. What if he comes out to Seattle and he hates the ballpark? He doesn't want to play here, and he just opts out.
Sure.
It's like, so Bellinger is incredibly tricky, although I think the fit is pretty close to perfect. I mean, he could play first base, he can play center field, he can play all three outfield spots. The
Yeah.
left-handed swing is great. He doesn't strike out a ton. He walks a ton. He's a really good athlete, strong arm. Yeah, and I could easily see him popping 35 homers at T-Mobile Park just because of the pole, the short porch in right field. So, like Bellinger, if he was just a 2 month, if the Cubs are just like, yeah, he's a rental, right? Like if the Cubs are going to be reasonable and be like, yeah, he's a rental, he's the guy I'd go get. But Happ is interesting. I feel like Jerry or Justin, one of them, really likes Ian Happ. Like I feel like that's kind of a Mariner type of guy. But again, you know, he's going to be owed what, $10 million-ish this year, and then about 20 million AAV over the next two. Like,
yeah, 40 million combined over the next two.
Right. So is he a $50 million player at 29 years old with, by the way, a strikeout rate that has jumped 8 or 9% this year over his career norms? He's not an elite defender. He's not an elite base runner. He doesn't have plus power.
Yeah.
He's a good player. He is a good player. But he's a 3-win player. Is that worth the prospects you have to give up and the $50 million you're now committed to him to go and get? It's a little tricky. And again, I think because you need the Cubs to send you money, or because you need the Cubs to take Garver or Haniger, more than likely for either of these guys, then whatever you think they're worth in a vacuum, you probably need to add 30% on top of that price to get them to, you know, make the money work for you. So yeah, both these guys are very tricky. They're both pretty good fits for Seattle. I think Bellinger is a great fit. I think Ian Happ is a really solid fit, like a really good fit.
Yeah.
So in a vacuum, yes, they should be interested in both of these guys. They should seriously consider exploring a trade for either one. In reality, the contract situation is so tough, and we know it shouldn't be. Like the Mariners should be more than willing to pay Cody Bellinger $27 million if he opts out. But Bellinger's just a separate issue altogether, because it's, you know, I don't think they're worried so much if he opts out. I think their worry is like, well, what if he
well,
it's not if he opts in, I should say. It's what if he opts out?
Yeah.
Like, but I think that's their concern with
Bellinger. If the Cubs are trying to get out of that contract, though, doesn't it hurt them more to try and sell him as a you know, 1 year plus 2 months type of player, or a 2 years plus 2 months type of player? Because at that dollar figure and relative to what he's doing this year, again, 109 WRC plus, like that's not worth $27 million. Right. So I feel like that hurts you more in the end if you're the Cubs, if you're trying to get rid of that contract. So I don't think they could ask for a lot in that situation in return.
It's still going to be a very depressed hitters market. So, you know, it's a really tough needle to thread for both the selling team and the buying team.
Yeah.
So by the way, there's no language, as far as I can tell, in the Bellinger contract that says that he has a no trade, or that if he's traded, this much becomes guaranteed, blah, blah, blah. Just a standard $2.5 million buyout if he opts out after each year. So at least that's just based on my quick research. I obviously don't
two and a half,
two
and a half if he opts out after this season,
Mm-hmm.
$5 million if he opts out after 2025.
Right. So, that has to factor in too. So like, even if you say, well, we pay a little bit less than half, let's call it $11 million this year, $12 million this year. Well, now there's a $2.5 million kicker at the end too, which the Mariners do have to account for. Jerry and Justin do have to account for. They do have a budget to work with. And I know that Stanton has said publicly that money's not going to be an issue for them at the deadline or whatever. Yeah, sure. I'll believe it when I see it. So, these are two players that make a lot of sense for Seattle. I would be really excited if they went and got Bellinger. I think he's a really good fit for the ballpark.
I love the idea.
Mm-hmm. But again, you have to pay rental prices for him, and you probably still need to find a way for the Cubs to send some money if it's a rental,
or they need to take Mitch Haniger, but
that would probably only happen with Happ.
But if they are trying to get rid of
motivation is to clear payroll, right?
Yeah, they're not gonna do that. They're probably not even interested in Garver at that point,
right? Although with Haniger and Garver, specifically in regards to Ian Happ, they do still clear 2026 payroll because both of those players will be free agents. They'll be free agents in 2026, whereas you'd still be paying Ian Happ in 2026 if you don't trade him. So maybe there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but just keep in mind, like if you're trying to dump a Haniger or Garver on them for Happ, for example, I think you're probably talking about like, okay, yeah, now it went from Michael Arroyo to Lazaro Montes because we have to take on, this contract, which, for Seattle, is that worth it? I think you'd probably just rather pay Michael Arroyo, but we'll see. I do think both of those players make a lot of sense, though, if they can make it work money-wise.
Yeah. All right, so let's take a look at the rest of the Cubs roster. Let's talk about like Seiya Suzuki and Mike Tauchman and some of those guys in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you once again by FanDuel. I know I'm saying the obvious here, but I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, unfortunately, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon, that's LOCKDON, and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. You can catch the M's and the Orioles tonight on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. We'll be talking about that series, big series between the M's and the O's a little later on in the show. But let's keep talking about the Cubs roster. If they do wind up selling, there are quite a few players that I find pretty interesting for the Mariners, and that goes beyond Nico Horner, Ian Happ, Cody Bellinger, the three guys that we've talked about over the last few segments dating back to yesterday. I also really like the idea of Seiya Suzuki, who, Colby, you've kind of mentioned in passing. We talked a little bit about him on the Patreon show last week. Tell us a bit more about Suzuki, why you like that idea, and if you think that's possible.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible. Pretty much anything's possible. I don't think it's likely that the Cubs are going to trade him, but yeah, he's an interesting player. Obviously, he was kind of a fan favorite target when he was a free agent a few years ago, but he has been solid in the big leagues, but he hasn't blossomed into like the star that some people thought he could be. It's pretty good right-handed power there. He's a pretty good defender. Like, there's a lot to like about Suzuki in general. He's at a good age. The contract is totally reasonable. But it's for all those reasons that I think the Cubs are probably more likely to hang on to him because, he is just solid. He's just a solid player who's not making a ton of money. Now, at the end of the day, I do think that they would listen on Suzuki because I think their ultimate goal is to clear up a spot for Pete Crow Armstrong to play every day for the rest of the year. So that would mean moving an outfielder, which would Suzuki, Happ, Bellinger. So I like Suzuki. The one thing I will say, he's striking out a little bit this year. Strikeouts pretty elevated, almost 28%. But 258, 329, 454. That'll play just fine. Defensive metrics, don't love the guy, but I do think that he's a pretty solid 3-win player. He's to me, he's like not quite as good as 2018 Mitch Haniger, but better than 2019 Mitch Haniger. Like he's like just a really solid player. Now the contract again, 5 years, 85 million. Not quite sure how that's broken down year to year, if that's just a flat AAV or not. But again, he is 29 years old, and he's still under contract for the next 3+ years. So it's a little bit of a risk because again, is he worth $85 million? If he's a 3-win player, sure. If he's a 2-win player, no, he's probably not worth that contract. And he's already, he's in his prime right now. So is it possible that he gets better than he is right now? Sure, it's possible. Is it likely? I'd say no. I think this is probably what you're getting. You're getting a 260 guy. You're getting, pretty solid on base. You're getting, more doubles than home runs. I think you're looking at 20 home runs, but you might be looking at 35, 40 doubles. And you're getting some speed on the base. Is not a ton. He's not a base stealer, and he's not a great defender. He's not bad, but he's not great. So it kind of depends on what metrics you want to use on his defense. Suzuki is a really solid player. He is a really good, like, number 5, number 6 hitter in a really good lineup. So he makes sense for Seattle, but there's a lot of questions about his contract, his age, and his production right now. They all kind of paint this picture of like a maybe, like, I consider it, but
Right.
I think the Cubs are going to look at this and they're going to be like, sure, give us Lazaro Montes because it's 3 years of this guy. And it's like, I'd rather pay the freight for, Luis Robert, because I feel like there's star upside in Robert that there just isn't in Suzuki. I'll throw a name at you. How about Drew Smiley?
Yeah.
Now Smiley is AAV is $9.5 million, and he has a mutual option after this year. But he's 35 years old. We know the Mariners acquired Smiley once, didn't work out. Thanks, Jim Leyland. But he can start. He's been relieving this year, but he has starting in his background. The Mariners could use kind of that number 5 swing type of guy who could also get guys out in the bullpen. He still misses bats at a pretty good rate. Walk rate's elevated this year, but in the past it's been totally fine. It's a 3.54 ERA. Again, I kind of like the idea of having this swing guy who can kind of start games for Brian Wu and then go back into the bullpen when you need him. And he's better than Jonathan Diaz. Is he worth, by the time you acquire him, $4 million? Probably not, but could you add him to like Cody Bellinger and in that way get the Cubs to take Mitch Haniger without demanding Lazaro Montes? Like, and maybe if you throw Drew Smiley onto Bellinger, you go, okay, well, we'll give you Haniger to kind of even out the money, but we're not going to do Laz because we're taking on another contract for you. But instead we'll do, we'll do Aiden Smith and Ty Pete or something like that, whatever it is, right? So, yeah, I do think that there are some relievers that are interesting here. Smiley, I like the ability to pitch out of the bullpen, but then also start if I need him to.
The other bat that I'm kind of interested in is Mike Tauchman. He's 33 years old, but he still has 2 years of arbitration left. He's only making $2 million this year. That's going to be cut in half, so you're only paying him $1 million for the rest of the year, or even a little under that. He's slashing 259, 359, 382 this year, 117 WRC plus. He puts the ball in play a lot. He also walks a lot, 13% walk rate this year, only striking out 20.3% of the time. Just a solid hitter, and a
feels very Seth Smith
Yeah, that's essentially the idea. He's on the IL, but he's expected back soon, I believe. It's a groin injury for Tauchman. He landed on the IL back on June 18th. So we'll see. I would suspect that he should be able to make his way back before the deadline. But that's an interesting player to take a shot on. Someone that probably shouldn't cost a ton, even though he has a couple of ARB years left because he's older. Yeah. And again, he's just a solid hitter. He's a guy that makes a lot of contact. And what's one of the biggest issues for the Mariners? Making contact.
Another big issue is they don't hit a lot of home runs, and you know who hits a lot of home runs but also can't hit? Patrick Wisdom, who's also on the Cubs.
Yeah. There's quite a few fits on this Cubs roster in general. I think this is certainly a place that the Mariners should be pretty interested in working something out with. I don't know if it's going to be necessarily on the high end like Bellinger and Happ, like with all the issues that we talked about earlier. But Tauchman makes sense. A couple of the bullpen arms make sense. We'll see about Seiya Suzuki. I'm not sure about that. But there are quite a few avenues here with the Cubs. Nico Horner, again, we talked about him yesterday. I think that makes a lot of sense if they're open to dealing him. And again, you need guys who, look, offense is your biggest issue, but you also need to get more athletic. You need to get better defensively as well. Horner does give you that. And like I said yesterday, he's a league average bat this year, but that's still better than quite a few of the guys you're rolling out in your lineup every day. So that would still help. That's still a net positive, even though it's, relatively underwhelming. But again, there are going to be guys that the Mariners potentially bring in over the course of this month that are going to be underwhelming to you, but they're probably going to help because they're probably still, they're more likely than not still a net positive over what you have right now. Cubs, definitely a way to make that happen. All right, so let's talk about the Baltimore Orioles, who are coming to town. 3 games set here, Tuesday through Thursday. We'll get you set for that one in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by PrizePicks and Tax Network USA. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. And even though the finals are over, the hoops action doesn't stop on PrizePicks. Women's basketball is still heating up with stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese looking to make names for themselves alongside greats like Breanna Stewart and Asia Wilson. You can win up to 100 times your cash watching them ball out. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's promo code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Here on Locked On Mariners, we pride ourselves on getting you the latest news for your team, whether it's the offseason, the draft, spring training, or the playoffs. It's year-round. You know what else is year-round? Collection season. Just because tax season is over doesn't mean the IRS will stop coming after you for unfiled taxes. The IRS can garnish your wages, levy your bank accounts, and even seize your property. Don't let the IRS target you. Let the licensed professionals and tax experts at Tax Network USA go to bat for you. With over 14 years of experience and an A+ rating by the Better Business Bureau, Tax Network USA has saved their clients over $1 billion in tax debt. Whether you owe taxes, have complicated matters that require tax planning, or finally hit that parlay this season and need help correctly filing, call 1-800-549-1000. That's 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/lockedon. See the link in this episode description. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Once again, you can catch the M's and the Orioles tonight on the Mariners hometown broadcast, SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. It's a big series on this big homestand, which has not gotten off to the greatest of starts. The Mariners 1-2 on this homestand so far. And now they're going to try and stop the bleeding against, the best team in the American League. And the second best team in all of baseball. So that's fun. That inspires me with a ton of hope. So let's talk about these pitching matchups, which are kind of up in the air at the moment. We were supposed to have an idea of how this was going to line up a few days ago. But now it says TBD for the Orioles on Wednesday and Thursday. But it seemed as if it was going to be, I mean, tonight it's confirmed it's going to be George Kirby against Grayson Rodriguez, but tomorrow it seemed like it was going to be Corbin Burnes against Logan Gilbert. Burnes was just activated off of the paternity list, so he shouldn't have any issue making that start tomorrow, but they still have it set to TBD for now. And then Thursday rather, it was supposed to be Bryce Miller against Dean Kramer, but Kramer still hasn't been activated off of the IL. So,
right. Kramer really struggled in his last rehab start. I think he's done 2 rehab starts now, and they haven't knocked on well at all. So they may want to keep him down there for another go around. So we really don't know about Thursday's slot. I feel pretty confident Burnes will start tomorrow, though.
Yay! I mean, now to be fair, does it really matter? Does it really matter?
No. Now the good news is you're countering them with your 2 best guys, or at least the 2 guys who are pitching the best for you right now in Kirby and Gilbert. Kirby against Baltimore? Don't know. Who knows? He's either getting shelled or he's going 8 scoreless. Like, there's no in between against Baltimore. Kirby faces the Orioles. Either the Orioles get him or he gets Baltimore. There's no like, oh, he went 6 innings and gave up 2 or 3 runs and like struck out 4. Like, nope. He's either going 3 1/3 and giving up 8, or he is going 7 scoreless and striking out 10. There is no in between in this matchup. And then Gilbert versus Burnes. I mean, if Logan keeps pitching the way he has been for the last month, this could be a legitimate Cy Young matchup. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. But obviously Logan, in the meantime, trying to secure his spot on the American League All-Star team. So lots of good pitching. And then Miller at home, pretty good. Wasn't all that great in his last outing. Really battled against Minnesota. So we know Baltimore can hit the fastball. So some fun pitching matchups. But, the way the Mariners are playing right now, you don't really want fun pitching matchups. You want to be facing like, again, not that it matters, but you want to be facing like the AA call-up who's 27 years old and never pitching the big leagues before.
Right. Because that guy will totally not strike out 9 over 5 innings pitched.
I mean, Sean Anderson didn't. So,
sure.
But yeah, I mean, pitching matchups are going to be fun. And Seattle and Baltimore, they play close games. Like, regardless of how you feel about these 2 teams, they always play really close games against each other. So,
yeah. I mean, the Mariners play close games against everyone, right?
Sure.
That's, again, this is how good this pitching staff is. And it's also a testament to just in general how this team grinds out games. But they got to take advantage of opportunities when they're given to them. And they'll get opportunities, especially if Kramer pitches against them on Thursday. Like, they will get opportunities to score in that game. You have to take advantage. The issue really for this team hasn't been generating traffic on the base pass. It's converting once they get that traffic on the base pass.
Yeah. You're also facing Baltimore at a decent time. They've lost 6 of their last 10. So, they're struggling a little bit like you are. They just got swept by the Astros not too long ago. So, you're not playing them at their best, but the Mariners offense has a tendency to make teams start to play better. It's weird how that happens, but it seems to happen a lot.
Sure. Hopefully here over the next few days, we can at least see, even if maybe they lose a couple of these games, we can see progress back into a more respectable product than we've seen over the last couple of weeks. That'd be nice. That'd be ideal. All right. That's going to do it for our show. But before we get out of here, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. It's on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app as well. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at @LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Dane Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.